Lately, you might have come across a lot of videos with titles like "Why the UFC Sucks Now" or "Why the UFC Sucks Now Well Since 2022" or "Why Women's MMA Sucks and the UFC Loves It" or "Why UFC Stars Suck Now" or even the "Why It Sucks to be a UFC Fighter" series. Yeah, we're still having that conversation. It's now 25 years since Dana White has been leading the UFC, and we're still talking about how it sucks to be a mixed martial arts fighter at the highest level. But before we begin, you might be wondering, who's this obscure brown dude with a funny accent talking about the UFC? And why should I listen to him? Well folks, my country has officially entered the race. And yes, we haven't exactly found our winning ways yet. There's a long way to go, but we're here now. More on this in another video. Yes, the sport is American, although it was originally set up as a platform to test the efficacy of a Brazilian martial art whose origins were in Japan. It was cross-cultural from the get-go. But like anything, once it touched the shores of the US, it blew up. But here we are as of January 2026 and none of the male champions are American. In fact, the only champion from the USA right now is Kayla Harrison, and that might just change in 2026 with the return of Amanda Nunes. No shade to the US, some of the greatest fighters and champions have been American. And truth be told, those might have been the glory days of mixed martial arts, where the sport was in the trenches, consumed by weirdos and misfits. Today, the sport is currently at the highest level it's ever been at. The meta couldn't have been more evolved with fighters like Ilia Topuria, Tom Aspinall, Islam Makhachev, Piotr Yan, and the list goes on. In fact, the meta has evolved to such a point that you just can't get away with being a jiu-jitsu black belt or a kickboxing world champion. You have to train everything and be good everywhere. Shouldn't all this be exciting then? The current meta of MMA is the highest it's ever been. The sport is the biggest it's ever been, transcending boundaries, not just with international fight cards, but a diverse roster of fighters from across the world. And just look at the production value. UFC 306 at the Las Vegas Sphere, the Abu Dhabi and New York cards, they're massive spectacles. And the most important bit, the company went from being valued at $2 million in 2001 to currently being worth $23 billion, according to Dana White's recent disclosure to Trump. So what's the problem then? Why am I not enamored with the spectacle that is currently the UFC? Why do I find myself skipping the embeddeds and the countdowns and even the press conferences? Unlike before, when I used to wait for the embeddeds in the press conferences, now I just watch the highlights, and only if it involves a fight I'm really invested in, which is not a lot these days. I enjoy a good fight, don't get me wrong. I love the display of controlled technical violence. But lately, it's just weird. I just don't care about the fighters anymore. I'm not invested in their storylines, and more importantly, I'm not interested in what they have to say. I just want to see good fights, like the best against the best. It's not like we're not getting good fights, but something just feels off. Don't get me wrong, it's not like I don't love the sport anymore. It's just that I think I hate the UFC. But that's the thing, I'll still consume it. Because I'm a sucker and a hypocrite. That part of me that needs to vicariously consume violence needs to be satiated. And it seems I'll tolerate any kind of degeneracy as long as I'm kept waiting long enough to get what I want. Let's talk about storylines. We don't have storylines like we used to. The UFC was known for its legendary rivalries. Sagas that built themselves organically. Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen, TJ Dillashaw versus Cody Garbrandt, John Jones versus Daniel Cormier. Heck, Stipe Miocic's run was probably the most legendary run at heavyweight we'd ever seen. And look at the send-off he got in the end. We also had true contenders facing dominant champions, and champions actually staying in their weight classes, defending multiple times. Demetrius Johnson, GSP, and even the UFC villain and greatest of all time, John Jones. Now, even if there are storylines, it all just gets drowned in the noise of the current mass media landscape. There's just too much everywhere all the time. At one point in the UFC, even if you had to be in Dana White's good books to have career longevity, your leverage was your fighting skill. Even if you and the boss didn't somewhat get along, you could still stay in the company and fight. Now it's different. It feels like it kind of doesn't matter if your skills can pay the bills. The more important question is, can you bend the knee? Moreover, do you have that certain appeal to the masses? Are you an influencer? Or are you related to UFC royalty so you can skip the line and have a crack at the title? Let's get to matchmaking. I don't want to have to remind you of the debacle that was John Jones as the heavyweight champion. Remember how the division got stalled because the UFC gave Jones matchups he wanted rather than have him face Tom Aspinall? It completely sucked the momentum out of Aspinall's career. Let's get to the present day. Why is Arman Sarukian made to sit on the sidelines when Paddy Pimblett is made to fight Justin Gaethje for what might be the lightweight title, since Ilya might not be back for a while due to domestic issues? which actually sucks. What the fuck is going on with the lightweight division? The once greatest weight class in the organization? What about featherweight? Why are Alexander Volkanovski and Diego Lopez running it back for a second time when we clearly have fighters like Movsar Evloev and Leron Murphy as legit contenders for the title? Feels like a convoluted mess. The UFC has consolidated all MMA hegemony, and the organization feels like a centralized authority in MMA that can override the rankings with the power to create demand for fights that audiences want to see. But then think about it. We've not exactly been getting the fights we think we should as fans. Is it because the company likes to keep its fans on their toes? Or is it because, after 35 years of existing, the company is still not sure audiences will tune in to watch UFC events that don't involve fighters if it thinks they are incapable of selling pay-per-views? And that's the schism. MMA is so mainstream now that there is a massive audience for it. Just not an audience that will tune in for an event if the fighters don't have popular appeal. It's funny, because I find myself more excited for fight night cards where no-name fighters are literally fighting for their livelihoods than high-profile pay-per-views where stars can get away with lackluster showings. That kind of sucks, because fighting your heart out for your family should mean earning a handsome paycheck. That's not to say Dana White doesn't reward exceptional performances, it's just that in the physically least rewarding sport in the world meant purely for people's entertainment, the spoils for the entertainers should be vast. On that note, let's talk about salaries for UFC fighters. Have the base pay and bonus structures changed significantly despite the company's current valuation? Doesn't seem like it. But Daniel Cormier claimed that the Paramount deal, which will now do away with the pay-per-view model, will somehow have the fighters earning more. I don't know, we'll just have to wait and see. Then again, the actual greatest combat athlete of all time is a company man after all. Now the question arises, do Dana White and the UFC only want fighters that can guarantee sold-out arenas? It sure seems like it. Unless there's a significant bump in the salaries of UFC fighters, the criticisms on fighter pay will continue to pile on. Remember Kang Lee versus UFC? They eat what they kill, is what Dana White once said, and he stands firm. It's a dog-eat-dog business. And if it just came down to a fighter's skills inside the octagon, we'd have a massive churning system with multiple fighters moving through the pipeline, multiple contenders, and even champions with multiple title defenses, like the Mount Rushmore of the MMA goats. But just to play devil's advocate, I have to admit that would also dilute the aspect of star power. Prize fighting has always depended on bankable stars, and the UFC is no different. If you can't sell your personality apart from your fighting skill, you probably belong in the B leagues. No, the UFC needs the whole package if it wants to push you. Otherwise, relegate yourself to being a journeyman. Hey, at least you made it to the big leagues, right? And speaking of selling yourself, let's talk about the rise of influencer culture in MMA and the UFC, and why it has many hardcore fans fuming. I could make a whole video about Nina Marie Danielle, or Nina Drama as she's popularly known, and I probably will. She's a fine example of how to ruffle feathers and rage bait a whole community and make a living off of it. But on the other side, fighters have had to start YouTube channels and podcasts, not just to stay relevant, but to bag those sponsorships that put food on their tables long after they're done fighting. Rampage Jackson claimed to have made more money through sponsorships than in all of his years as an active fighter. Of course, there's also MMA GOAT Demetrius Johnson, who made quite a life for himself in the world of content creation. From gaming to his mighty podcast to his series with Street Beef's icon Death Sentence, DJ represents the gold standard of being an influencer post-fighting. Of course, Mighty Mouse will himself tell you that it's not wise to depend on your salary as a UFC employee if you're thinking long term. But that's the thing, Mighty Mouse has done this for a long time, and his content is interesting. With some of these other guys, I don't know. Like I said before, I might tune in for the analysis, but I'm not interested in their opinions about the world. And now, my biggest gripe with the sport, its intersection with politics, and how the UFC was used as a PR machine to get a president elected. And now we seem to be on a collision course. In an ideal world, I'd keep politics away from competition, but it is what it is, and I or we will just have to accept and live with it for now. But that doesn't mean there isn't space for those that think differently or out of the box or what have you. The wheels of time are shifting, and so will the landscape. I have to admit though, there are great fighters in the promotion, and that's the one thing that will remain consistent in the sport and the UFC. We won't have a shortage of great fights, fighters, champions, and contenders, especially given the global nature of the sport. And when it comes down to it, nothing can replicate the action inside the cage, especially live. That's a universal feeling no one can quite explain, and it's amazing. Fighting brings people together. It creates a space for the underdog to overcome. And as long as the UFC exists, we will have contenders rise and fall, and storylines that write themselves. Of course, there will always be glitches in the system, and the odds will always seem against the ones you're rooting for. But the tides of time are shifting along with the landscape. And with the new year upon us and the new Paramount deal ushering in the end of the ESPN era, we might see a fresh perspective in the world's leading MMA organization. And even if that doesn't happen, I'm still going to tune in because I love mixed martial arts.